and for all those listening, hopefully at a recording one day, is Daf Yud Zayin 17 in Masechet Shavuot. We're two and a half weeks in, and we are in a Mishnah which talks about this problem of a person who is tamei and goes into the Beit HaMikdash. That's of course a prohibition. If you do it on purpose, you're chayav karet. If you do it by mistake, now by mistake here means you knew you were tamei, you forgot, and then you did it, and then you remembered afterwards, or you knew that you were tamei the whole time, but you forgot it was the Beit HaMikdash, right? So you forgot something about it. So then you bring a karban olev yored. And the Mishnah continued and said, but if you get tamei in the Beit HaMikdash, right, then you've got to get out of there as quickly as possible. And if you don't, and you stick around, either because you bow down completely, or you stick around long enough to bow down completely, then you are chayav a karban. Says Rava today, 2 lines in the bottom of Tetzayin Amabed. Boy Rava, tzarich sheyel malkut. Now that's all talking about a karban. But let's say you do it on purpose. You're in the Beit HaMikdash, you become tamei. They say you got to leave, and you're like, I don't feel like leaving. I really want to see the next scene, right? So I'm not. The question then is, how much time do you have to wait in order to be chayiv makot, if any, right? Do you need shihiyah? Oh, in tzarich sheyel malkut, meaning are you chayiv right away, or if you say I don't care. Right? I mean, you say, I'm going to stay. You're chayiv makut right away, even if you then change your mind 10 seconds later. Or just like for a karban, you need to get out. You need a certain amount of time. Do you need that for makut? So the karban gemir shihiyah, we have the question of shihiyah, of a minimum amount of time, only about the karban, but the makut lo gemir shihiyah. But we didn't learn that about makut. Otilma bifnim gemir shihiyah. Or is it that anything that happens inside, if you become tamei, you then get X amount of time to get out of there? Lotion on the karban, lotion on the malkut. Doesn't matter whether it's a mistake or on purpose. We don't have a resolution to that question. And this is obviously going to begin us on a series of questions which we cannot resolve about the details, the nitty-gritty, as we might put it, of tuma inside, what's tuma, what's inside. Says Rava, the next question, boy Rava, tala atzmo ba'avir azara. Let's say a person is in the airspace of the azara, but not on the ground of the azara, right? He is suspended in the air. So, of course, that nowadays is very easy to imagine, but even then, right, let's say he's being held by ropes, or he's being, there's some other way that he's in the airspace, or even in a box in the airspace. So then, do you say, kigamir shiyah, shiyah debat shtachava? Do you say that when we talk that if you become tamei in the space, right, that you need to get out of there quickly? Is that only because remember, the shir of Shia we said yesterday was bowing down, and was reading that whole pasuk that talks about bowing down. But obviously in this context, you can't bow down. You're not on the ground, right? Bowing down requires you to be on the floor. So that's only where there's such a concept of being on the floor, of bowing down. But the lav bat hashtachava lo gamiri. But if you're not able to bow down because you're suspended in the air, so then there shouldn't be any concept that you need to be long enough to bow down. Odilma, again, maybe it's nothing to do with what you're actually doing. It's bifnim shia gamiri. We learned about shia on any tuma inside. Lo shnad bat hashtachava, lo shnad la bat hashtachava. It doesn't matter whether you could bow down or can't. Teiko, we don't resolve that question. It's a very similar question.
I've not heard of any tour guides who've been doing tour guides by balloon.
Exactly, right. So I don't think it's pre-helium days, but yes, that would be another way to do it. So Boy Ravashi. Now, just to be clear, our Mishnah, our Gemara, in the question assumes that that's prohibited, right? That it's totally prohibited. The only question is, do you have to get out of there quickly or slowly, right? But that you're not allowed to do that nowadays. And obviously, there's many discussions, not in this context, but about Tumad Mate, of being on an airplane above a cemetery, right? So, so potentially, I guess it would be the same question of being in an airplane above the Harabayit if you're Tamei.
That's a big deal when you take off from one of the New York City airports, because you'll often be flying over a cemetery.
Right. But then it's a question of Jewish graves, not Jewish graves, which ones?
Right.
I don't, again, these are very practical and technical and not halacha for today. But Ravashi, now ask Ravashi a different question, which again, these all are related. Let's say Timei Atzmo B'Mesi. Let's say a person's in the Beit HaMikdash and they become tamei on purpose, right? Again, they say, I don't care, there's, I don't know, whatever, a piece of meat that's tamei, and that might not be the way to become tamei. They touch something that's tamei, let's say, right? And they do it on purpose, right? So we said before, if you're standing inside the Beit HaMikdash and you become tamei by mistake, we say to you, get out of here, right? And you've got to leave. And as long as you leave expeditiously, you're not over any prohibitions, because what are you supposed to do? You can't fly out of there, right? So the only problem, the Mishnah said, if you go derech kitzara, derech aruka, we're going to discuss that much more today, right? You have to go the short path, the long path. But what if you're doing it on purpose? Then do you get sort of the time to say, well, I became tamei on purpose, but as long as I get out of here in time, I'm not over the prohibition. No. The onus gemir shia is shihiyah, the question of giving you time to get out of there, only relevant if it's a mistake, if it's forced on you. You became tamei unwillingly. And b'mezid lo gemir shia, but on purpose, there's no question. Even if you run out of there right away, you'll be tamei. You'll be over the isser, sorry. Odilma, or again, similar to the same words as before, is it a concept about tuma bifnim? Bifnim gemir shia, loshna ba'onus, loshna b'mezid, and again, teku. So we don't really know the exact parameter of this concept that if a person becomes tamei inside the Beit HaMikdash, the goal is for them to leave quickly at the shortest possible route. But does that apply even if they became tamei on purpose? Now, remember, the Mishnah introduced a whole nother concept, which we're going to really get to tomorrow, of being mishamesh, a woman who's a nida. A man is having intercourse with a woman. She tells him, I'm a nida. So now all of a sudden there's a big problem. And how quickly does he exit her, right? Which is obviously a very different but interesting concept about where you apply. You're somewhere, and a prohibition happens to you. What do you do to extract yourself from that prohibition, right? So obviously we talked in the Mishnah that's a little different at the intercourse because it's hana'ah, and anyways, we'll get to that more later today. But Boy Ravashi, to connect it to something that's not tuma and not nida, what about a nazir, right? So a nazir is very similar to tumat mikdash. A nazir is not allowed to become tamei, right? If a nazir becomes tamei on purpose, they get makot. Let's say a nazir bekever, a nazir who found himself inside a kever. He didn't know, he didn't go there on purpose, he didn't intentionally walk in, but he finds out, either someone tells him, we'll see some cases in a minute, right? But he finds out he's right here in a kever. So now you tell him, uh-oh, you just stepped on a kever, you're tamei. So now what's the question? Is he, or even let's say he did it on purpose even, right? Does he get the opportunity to say, I'm going to leave the kever as quickly as possible, and as long as I leave quickly, I wasn't over any prohibition, or not? Does he get time to leave before he's chayiv makot or not? Do you say bifnim gemir shehiyah? Bifnim meaning inside the Beit HaMikdash is where we talked about this concept of giving you time, but bechutz lo gemir shehiyah, but outside of the Beit HaMikdash there's no such concept. Or dilma, where the concept is be'ones gemir shehiyah. It's talking about be'ones, lo shtam bifnim, lo shtam bechutz. It doesn't matter whether it's inside or outside. If something is forced upon you, right, then your reaction to that is, let me get rid of it. And as long as you get rid of it quickly, you're not chayev. Odilma or not, take on. So we don't resolve that either. We're not going to resolve a lot of things today. So that's the first sort of complexity of the Mishnah, this question of shihiyah. Right? The next thing in the Mishnah was, forget about shihiyah, which means standing and not either bowing down or counting to 20. Let's say we counted the pasuk yesterday, maybe 20 seconds or 15 seconds. But then we said in the Mishnah that you've got to leave as quickly as possible, right? And the Mishnah said, Balo ba'aruka, if you leave in a long path, right? You're standing in the Beit HaMikdash, you become tamei, but you don't want to go straight out the door next to you because you want to go say hi to your friend on the other side of the Azara. The Azara is a very big social scene, right? Hundreds and hundreds of people getting together, and you saw someone you know, and you're like, I'll leave that way because on the way I can say hi to someone, or it's close to my hotel or something. Then you're chayav because you basically tarried with tuma in the azara. But if you go b'ktsara, then you're patur. Now says Rava, I want to point out to you, says Rava, very interesting halacha, that when we say kitsara, that you've got to go out on the shortest path. That means that you make a map with an X from where you're standing to the nearest door, and you go to that door. It doesn't mean that you have to go to that door quickly. Meaning, kitsara sha'amro afilu ekev b'tzad godel. Even if you put your heel to your toe, meaning you walk, stutter step kind of thing. So you walk very slowly. As long as you consistently walk towards that door, I feel like all yom kulo, even if it takes you all day, which is obviously an exaggeration, but even if it takes you a long time, it doesn't say that you have to run out of that door. You have to pick the closest geographic door, and you have to leave that way. And as long as you are leaving, even if you are tiptoeing through and it's very slow, it takes you 20 minutes or an hour, you're still patur. So that's what Rava introduced. So it's not necessarily a time question, it's a space question, right? You've got to go to the nearest exit as whatever rate you want to go. Now, boy, Rava, then Rava asked the following question. Shihiyot ma shiyitzarfu. Remember, we said that in addition to leaving at the closest way, you have to, in order to be chayav, you have to delay for, let's just say 30 seconds, okay? I exaggerate a little bit, but let's just say that. So let's say you take a 10 steps and you stop for 10 seconds, and you take 10 steps and you stop for 10 seconds. Are those 10-second time periods mitzaref to make you chayav? Says Gemara, well, tifshalei mitidei, I don't get it. Why don't we, he just said you can take 2 hours to walk. Obviously, if you're taking 2 hours to walk, you're taking a lot of time. Says Gemara, not necessarily. Hatam b'delo shah. All Rava was saying is you can take hours to walk if you walk consistently, right? You're constantly in motion. But the question is, what if you actually stop? Are the shiot mistaref? He didn't answer the question. The next question was Boimini Abaya mi Rabba. Abaya asked a question of Rabba, which in some ways is the exact conflict of what we just said, right? Opposite of what we just said. What did Abaya ask Rabba? We are around 8 lines or 9 lines from the bottom. First word on the line. Boimini Abaya mi Rabba. What if you are balo ba'aruka shir kitsara, right? Let's say, so now Abai is obviously not necessarily agreeing with Rava, who said the only thing that matters is the distance. Says Abaya, what if it's the time that matters, right? And meaning, we do a Google Maps, right? You're standing on the northwest corner of the Mizbeach. The closest door is a 400-foot, maybe longer, 40 amma walk away. It would take you 3 minutes to do that. So basically, the clock starts. You get 3 minutes to leave. Let's say you say, you know what? I want to go out a different way. Let's say my hotel's near a different way, but I'll run, right? So I'll go the further way, but I'll run and it'll take me 3 minutes and I'll be fine. I won't be anywhere longer in the Azara with Tuma. So you're basically now making it about time, not about space, right? So let's say you leave in a long way, but shir kitzara, you make it the amount of time it would take you to go in a short way because you can run. Rashi has a good statement here about this, about running. Yeah, Rashi says you ratz b'merutzeh. You run like a marathon, you run a race. So you basically get out of there really quick. So mahu, is it, says Abaya to Rabba, shir gemiri? The question is the shir, and the shir meaning the time it takes to get out. If you get out in 3 minutes or less, you're patur. We say, no. You have to go to the shortest route, right? And baruka chayav b'ktsara patur. Patur. If you go out the long route, no matter how much time it takes you, you'll be chayav. If you go out the short route, you'll be patur. Amar lei. And so Rabba said back to Rava, lo nitzna aruka lidachot etzlo. The chiyuv for going to the long one cannot be pushed off, meaning you can't go the long route. Even if you run, you can't push off the prohibition of going the long route by running. So you can't get out of it in that way. So that was what Rabba said back to Abaya. Amatkifla Reb Zera said, Reb Zera, I don't think that makes any sense. Because Al Dekaimalan, we have, and we introduce now a whole nother halacha, which is also, again, very tangentially related to Masechet Shavuot, but very interesting to me, right? Asked Reb Zera, we have a halacha, we are 5 lines from the bottom, that a tamei sheshimesh b'mita. If a person is tamei, and they're kohen, let's say, and they're mishamesh in the Beit HaMikdash, they chayav mita. Mita means here mita b'dei shamayim. Now, which is interesting halacha, right? Because we've been talking here about a tamei who's in the Beit HaMikdash, or let's say eats kachim, but no one ever said anything about a tamei doing avodah. Now, if you recall, a tamei who's in the Beit HaMikdash on purpose, right, has to get killed by karet, right? So karet is stronger, is heavier responsibility than mita b'dei shamayim, right? Because it means you're cut off. So Reb Zera said that there's a breita, which said, I think it's a breita, that says that if you're tamei and you do avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, you get mita b'dei shamayim. Says Reb Zera, according to you, Rabbah, that the question, according to you, Rabbah, that the question is not a time question, meaning we don't say you're tamei, it takes 3 minutes to leave from the shortest route. If you run a long route and it takes you 3 minutes, that's fine also, you're patur, right? It's that you got to go the shortest route. So I don't understand, says Reb Zera, how you ever have a case of a person who's tamei a Kohen is Tameh, who does avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, who be chayiv mita b'dei shamayim, that he wouldn't also be chayiv karet. Hechi mishkachat. How are you going to find that case? Because look, idelo shaha. If he didn't take any extra time, meaning he's Tameh, we tell him you got to leave. He says, okay, I'm going to leave, but he also does avodah. Well, then hechi avad avodah, right? If you took no extra time, you can't do avodah, right? Because if you go right away, which is why you be pater and karet, then when did you do the avodah? Id shaha. Now maybe you're going to say to me, he delayed, right? He delayed a minute. Said, I'm going to do my last licks of avodah and then I'll leave. Well, then he's not chayiv mita b'dei shamayim. He's chayiv karet because he delayed leaving the Beit HaMikdash. Bar karetu. So now, my whole life thought that the way to explain this Gemara was that shiura gemirala. The issue is not the distance. The issue is the time. So we say to him, you're a Kohen. You became Kameh in the Beit HaMikdash. Get out of here. It'll take 2 minutes to walk to the nearest exit, right? And he says, Mishkach, you could find a case where he said, wait a second, I want to just do this last bit of avodah. In the middle of the avodah, I want to do one more thing. And anas nafshe b'kitzara, so he basically forced himself. He rushed to leave the shortest route. So he cut a minute off of the leaving time. He ran. So now instead of it taking 2 minutes to leave, it took a minute. And he had an extra minute to aver avodah. So he said, look, I'm going to just do the last avodah. I'll pour the blood. I'm holding blood in my hand. I'll pour it on the mizbeach, and then I'll run out of here. So he is not chayav karet because he ran out in the same amount of time it would have taken him to leave if he walked normally, but he did avodah, and therefore the Gemara in Sanhedrin says because he did the avodah, he's chayav mita b'dei shamayim. So that's reasonable. Ella turned the page to Daf Tet Zayin Yud Zayin. Sorry, I'm a bet. Eli Amrid Dafka Gemira. But if you say that it's Dafka, meaning you have to leave the shortest route, right? Then Heichim Mishkachada. How do you ever find a case where a Kohen could do avodah when he's tamei and not be chayiv karet for delaying? He's only chayiv b'dei shamayim. Says Abaya, that's, I appreciate that you're trying to defend my question, but my kusha, it doesn't sound very imaginative. We can come up with a case where a Kohen could do avodah without delaying anything. How? Mishkachet l'shabab b'kitzara, he walked the normal shortest way, but on the way, he walked by the Mizbeach, and there's a pitchfork, right? A tzinura means a fork, but it means, the fork that they used to turn over the food. Hafach b'tzinura, he turned over the coals on the way. He didn't delay anything, maybe a second, but not anything significant. And why is that avodah, turning over the coals or the fork, holding the meat on the coals in the mizbeach? Kid Rav Huna, Dam Rav Huna, as Rav Huna said, a zar shafach b'tzinura chayv mita. If a zar had done that, had turned over the meat on the coals in the mizbeach, he'd be killed for doing avodah. So that is an avodah. It doesn't take any time off your time. You can be walking straight along and doing avodah, and that is the chiddush. That even though you walked out the shortest way, and therefore you're not chayiv karet for being tamei inside the Beit HaMikdash, you are chayiv mita b'dei shamayim for doing avodah. Now says the Gemara, let's go back to this case of Rav Huna, Gufa, 5 lines from the top. Amar Rav Huna said, Zar shafach b'tzinura chayiv mita, that a zar who turns over the fork of that's controlling the fire right on the pit on the mizbeach of the meat is chayiv mita for doing that. Says the Gemara, I don't understand what exactly did this person do. Hechidami. Where am I? Yeah, what did he do? Look, if he hadn't turned over the meat, it wouldn't get eaten, it wouldn't get burned up because it was all burning on one side and not burning through the other side. Then pshita, obviously, it's avodah, right? There's avodah in the Beit HaMikdash of burning the meat on the mizbeach, and he did an essential act to burn the meat on the mizbeach. So what's the chiddush? Now, let's say even if he had not turned it over, it would have been burned up by the fire. Then my Ovid, what did he do by turning it over, right? As everyone knows who's done a barbecue, right? There's this compulsion to turn things over, even though it probably has no impact on the thing cooking, right? So you're just making yourself happy by turning things over. So then why is that a act of a Kohen that we would say a Zar would be chayav for? Lo tzricha, says the Gemara, the obvious middle case, right? The middle case is that, look, lo hafach bo, if this Kohen in our case, or the Zar in Rav Huna's case, would not have been mitapech, would not have rearranged the food on the fire, in this case the meat on the fire, then mitakli bitarti shai, it would have taken a much longer time to cook. It would have taken a couple hours. But because he moved it around and put it in a higher place and turned it over, now it only takes 1 hour to be consumed on the Mizbeach. And the Hakamashma, the Chiddush of Rav Huna is that the whole krovi avoda, that since you're bringing it closer to the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash is to burn things on the Mizbeach, and you facilitated that by making it happen quicker, then it's considered you did the avodah, even though had you done nothing, it would have also been burned. It didn't need you, right? It would have been burned but it would have been burned in 2 hours. You, by stoking the coals or turning over the meat or moving the position, made it work faster. And that's considered to be engaging in the avodah of burning food on the Mizbeach. And therefore, you're chayav if you're a zar. And if you're a kohen and you're tamei and you're walking outside the azara, but it doesn't take any more time to just turn over the meat on your way, then you'd be chayav mita b'dei shamayim. So again, not very likely to happen in real life, but a very interesting case. Like much of the Gemara, right? Says Reb Oshaya, now 10 lines or so from the top of Yud Zayin Amud Bet. Amar Rebbe Oshaya. Be'ina de'ema milta. Says Rebbe Oshaya, I really wanted to say something. I had a great thought. Umistafina michafre, but I'm afraid people are going to make fun of me, right? I'm afraid of my peers, is how I would say it. Meaning,
Rob Oshaya is afraid of these colleagues?
Well, don't worry, he's going to say it. You know, this is the introduction you do. You're like, don't be insulted, but no insult. But so Rebbe Shai says, I really want to say something that makes a lot of sense to me. I know that something, and this happens to all of us very often. You have a thought and it makes a lot of sense in your head, but something about it tells you that it doesn't add up, right? And that when you say it, people are gonna find holes within it. So he said, I have a insight that I want to make. I'm afraid that this is not going to hold up the water, but let me tell it to you and see what happens. What do I want to innovate? I wanted to say that, look, remember, there's a prohibition in the Torah that we just had recently and earlier in Vayikra, that if a house becomes tamei and it becomes mitzorat, right? A house is a Beit HaMenuga, which is a house of tzorat, you're not allowed to walk into that house. And if you walk into that house, you become tamei. Right? Now, I want to innovate, said Rabbi Shaya, that when it says you can't walk into the house, it doesn't mean you can't be in the house. It means you can't come into the house. And if you can get into the house in an unusual way, you wouldn't necessarily become tamei. So I say, says Rabbi Shaya, hanichnas lebayit beit hamenuga. You go into a house that is officially tzarat, and you go in backwards, derech achorav, right? You go in walking backwards with your back to the house. And afilu kulo chutz michotzmo, even your entire body, except for your nose, which, right, if you have a good long nose, will be the last thing left outside when you start walking in backwards, right? So, but you've gone in now. I admit, says Rabbi Oshai, if your whole body is in the house, you're tamei. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you're walking into the house and your entire body, except for your nose, is in the house, you're tahor. Even though 98% of you is in the house, it doesn't matter. Because what the Torah says is haba el habayit. Someone who comes into the house, derech biyah, asrat Torah. The Torah prohibited the normal way of coming in. Since this is not the normal way of coming in, you're not considered to be in the house. Now, says Rabbi Shaya, this seems like a great halakha. Why do I feel that people are going to jump down my throat? Because by the same logic, mistafina mechavrai, I am nervous about being, bullied and being ashamed by my chaverim, because why don't you say by the same logic, yihachi kulanami? Let's say you walk into the house completely. Let's say your nose comes into the house also, right? Your entire body comes into the house. By my logic, you never, quote unquote, came into the house, right? So if you never came into the house, you shouldn't be tamei. And to me, that seems a little bit too far. You're in the house. You're completely in the house. You're sleeping on the bed, right? Of course you're tamei. But I don't think that going in means going in anyway. Going in means going in the normal way. But I don't understand. I'm a little bit nervous how to justify someone being in the house being tamei if I claim it wasn't considered going into the house. So that was what Boshaya said. Amar Rava said, Rava, I don't think you should be scared of anything. We're not going to attack you. We agree with you. Because we understand that kulo, if your entire body goes into the house, then you're tamei, not because you went into the house, but because you're like a table in the house. Lo garami kelim shebabayit. You're tamei, like the objects in the house. It says that everything in the house becomes tamei. You never went into the house, right? Remember, there's a whole mitzvah. You should take your food out, your stuff out of the house, right? Because as soon as the Kohen says this house is tzarat, the couch becomes tamei and the table becomes tamei. So we said take out your furniture before they announce it. But so clearly there's a separate halacha that everything in the house becomes tamei, and it's true that would apply to a person also. Now you could argue, of course, that people are not things, and so maybe that shouldn't apply to a person, but it does, right? So that applies to, that applies to the person being in the house. But if you're getting usher or tamei from walking into the house, then I agree with you, Rabbi Shai. It only means walking in, a normal way to walk in. If you walk in backwards, you're not tamei. So that is in fact what Rabbi Shai said, and you can see why it's related to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah, we're going to continue with the Braita, which supports that from our Mishnah, or similar to our Mishnah, is talking about walking into the Beit HaMikdash when you're tamei. So Tayina Mihachi, in fact, we have a Braita which says something very similar. The Braita says Gagin Halalu. Now this Braita is talking about, remember we had a whole discussion about in the Beit HaMikdash, what is part of the Beit HaMikdash and what is not, right? So the Braita says that the Gagin, the roofs, meaning, and they obviously had, not obviously, but they had flat roofs usually, so you would live on the roof, right? You could sit there, you would eat there, you'd have a table there, you might have a hut there, a tent there. So the Gagin, the roofs of the rooms in the Azara, right? So this is within the walls of the Azara where there's lishkaot, there's like a ta'in, we would call them cells, right? They have sections of offices. On top of them, ein ochlim sham kachei kachim. Says the Braita, you cannot eat kachei kachim on top of them, because although you can eat kachei kachim inside the Azara, the roof of the Azara, according to this Tana, is not the same kedusha, right? You have to be on the ground or the airspace up to the roof, so that you could be suspended, but you have to be suspended in the less than 10 feet off the ground. But once you're on the roof, that's a different amachitza, and that's a different area, and you no longer can eat kachei kachim in that place. And continues
There's a long discussion in Eruvim about the status of roofs. Do they have the same status as the building below them, and do the partitions of the building continue upward?
Right.
Which would be
100%.
relevant
So
here.
this is very relevant, and this is one opinion. I don't think it's the only one. Tosfos points out here another halacha, which is that not only do you have to be in the Azara when you eat kachei kachim, but you have to be able to see the Azara. So there would have to have been a glass floor, just to be clear, right? Where you can see through the roof. Because if you're really on a roof and you can't see anything, then obviously you can't eat anything there anyways. But even if you had, or Tosfos puts it, a window in the nekev, a hole in the floor where you could see it, it's still considered a different mechitza according to this Tana. But and we'll see why we're quoting this in a second. It's not our question right now. The next detail of the Braita is ein shachatin sham kachim kalim. You can't shecht kachim kalim in that area on the roof, because again, you have to shecht kachim kalim on the floor of the Azara or in this airspace right above it, and you can't do it on the roof. Okay, that's the same halacha. And continues the Braita, tamei shenichnas derech gagin leheichal patur. If you go into the space of the heichal, but you go completely through the roofs, you walk on the roof to get into the space of the heichal. Let's say it was 100 by, it was bigger in the Beit HaMikdash, but say 100 by 50, and you walk into that space, but you don't touch the ground or the airspace of the ground. You go only in the roof, then you would be patur, because shenemar ve'la mikdash lo tavo. It says if you're tamei, don't go into the Beit HaMikdash, but that means derech biyah asra Torah. It means the Torah only prohibited a normal way of going. If you're like James Bond and you're going, by jumping from one roof to the other, then you are patur from that, as long as you don't enter the ground of the Azar. So that is why we quoted this, because it supports Reb Oshaya, who said something very, very similar about a house of tzarat. And so you could already see the many parallels between these different rules.
So a question about the needing to leave by the closest exit. The Mishnah in Tamid describes that there was a women's entrance that women would use to go to the Azara, presumably if they're like shechting their own carbon, which women can do. So what if you're that happens, you're a man and that's the closest entrance?
Yeah.
Or
So
if you're a woman and you're,
I don't have an answer, to be clear.
yeah.
But I think, and we'll get to Masechet Tamid in good time, I hope,
Mm.
that I think that doesn't mean that men can't. I don't think that's Rat Nashim or the Ticha for the Nashim for their karbanot of their mitzorat, right? That's where it is, and their
Yeah.
leda. That means men can't go there. I think it just that's what they were commonly used.
Yeah, there's
But
not,
I don't know,
Tamid does not
nowadays in
have a
Israel,
lot of, yeah, Tamid doesn't have a lot of Gemara in it, so.
right? I say nowadays in Israel, there are obviously many religious sites have separate entrances for men and women, but I'm
Yeah.
not so sure that it was that way in the Beit HaMikdash. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
it doesn't seem like, is it, other than that one sentence in Tamid, that's the only mention of it.
Right. So yeah, I guess I don't recall more, but let's keep our ears open. Anyways, continue the Mishnah to the most enigmatic part of our Mishnah, which we will begin to discuss today, but not finish. And this is at the 2 dots around 15 lines from the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Bet. We said in the Mishnah, Zuhi mitzvat aseh shebemikdash she'en chayavim aleh karet. Right. This is a mitzvat aseh in the Beit HaMikdash where you're not chayav for it. Now, what does that mean? Zuhi. Right. This is as opposed to what? Right. So normally you would have a context where you would say, Rashi quotes this kind of theoretical discussion. Ein chayavin al aseh shebemikdash, right? You're not chayav on an aseh in the mikdash. Somewhere it said that, and our Mishnah is saying reference that thing. This is the aseh in the mikdash that you're not chayav. But where does it say there's an aseh that you're not chayav that we're saying this is that aseh? Hechikoi, what are you referring to? Amar zuhi. What are you referring to? This is what we meant when we said something. This is where we're referring to a Mishnah in Hariyat. Hatamkai, referring to this very important Mishnah in Hariyat, which says, Ein chayavin alasei ba'alotasei shebimikdash. You are not chayav for committing an asay. No, it's not referring to you, it's saying Beit Din. Right? Remember the halacha of Hariyat referred to the fact that there are times where the Torah says don't do something. If Beit Din comes around and says you can do this thing, they make a mistake. And they paskin, you're allowed to be mechalel Shabbat if you do it in this way. And then it turns out that they're wrong. Then they bring a karban, right? A karban of the Par Halim Davar Shel Tzipor, or whatever. Well, there's different karbanot, and we'll discuss that. Hariyat is actually coming up very soon. Not very soon, but in a few months, right? So the Mishnah says that you're not chayav on an asay or a lot asay that's about something in the Beit HaMikdash, because we don't hold Sanhedrin responsible for things in the Beit HaMikdash the same way. And Ein miviyin asham taloi al asay al tasei shebemikdash. The Mishnah continues and says, you don't bring an asham taloi. Remember, an asham taloi is where you do something wrong, maybe, right? You might have done something wrong, you might not, and you can't clarify it. You bring an asham taloi. That doesn't apply to an asay and a lot asay in the Beit HaMikdash, so doing something like a tumah or karbanot in the Beit HaMikdash. Aval, continues the Mishnah, chayavin al asay al lot asay shebenida. You are chayav, meaning the Sanhedrin, that paskins incorrectly and then goes back on their psak, is chayav to bring a par helam davar shel tzibor, or a par of the tzibor on an asay and a lot asay shebenida, if it has to do with nida, right? And we'll see again what that means. Umiviyin asham taloi al asay v'al asay shebenida. And you also bring a asham taloi on an asay and a lot asay that has to do with nida. Now, why those things are related, we don't know yet. So that is the Mishnah in Hariyut, which obviously is a very confusing Mishnah. Now, our Mishnah in Shevuot is referencing that Mishnah and saying, Ka'amar, Zuhi mitzvat aseh shebemikdash in chayavin aleh. This is the mitzvat aseh in Beit HaMikdash, this mitzvah of a person becomes tamei in the Beit HaMikdash. They are supposed to leave quickly. So that's a mitzvat aseh. Right? The mitzvah lot aseh is don't enter the Beit HaMikdash. But here, you're in the Beit HaMikdash, you become tamei, now you have a mitzvah to say, get out of there. That's a positive commandment. If, let's say, you don't fulfill that commandment, you don't get out of there, then you get karet. But if Beit Din paskins and says, oh, the halacha is that if you become tamei in the Beit HaMikdash, you're allowed to stay till nightfall, whatever. They make some rule. You're already there, you don't have to leave. You just can't come back the next day. And then everybody does that. Then in chayavin aleh. Then we don't bring the par of the mistake of the Beit Din. And then our Mishnah now makes sense because it continues, because the next words in our Mishnah were, Ezo hi mitzvat aseh shebenida shechayavin aleh. right? And we wondered in the Mishnah, what does nida have to do with anything? But now, if you know this Mishnah in Harayot, you know that nida were the next words in the Mishnah. And the Mishnah said that if it's a mitzvah asay of nida, then you are chayav. Now, again, nida is usually a lo taseh. Don't sleep with a nida, right? What's a mitzvah asay with a nida? So our Mishnah explained the mitzvah asay with a nida is the same as the Beit HaMikdash. A man is sleeping with his wife, let's say, or anyone, right? Hayamishamesh im hatohora. A man is sleeping with a tahor woman, and v'amralo, and she says to him in the middle of intercourse, nitmeti, I just felt that I got my period and I became tameh. So now he's got a mitzvah asay of what should he do. Now, what he should do is different than what you should do in the Beit HaMikdash. In the Beit HaMikdash, you're supposed to leave the situation as quickly as you can. But by Anida, you're not supposed to. Because Piresh Miyad, if he leaves her right away and he exits, Chayav, he'd actually be Chayav for sleeping with Anida. Mipnei, Shiyatziato, Hanalo, Kibiato, because there's benefit, there's Hana'ah, there's pleasure in that action. And so extracting is the same as going in that way. Tzia is the same as Biyah, right? And so unlike the Beit HaMikdash, you're not supposed to act quickly to leave in both scenarios. In the Nida, as we said in our Mishnah, you're supposed to wait, do nothing, wait till your erection goes away, and then exit, because then there's no joy, there's no pleasure in it. And so it's very different, of course, in the Mikdash, where you're not supposed to stand there and wait for any time, but in Nida, you're supposed to. Now, should we keep going? Let's keep going, right? Itmar, we are 7 lines from the bottom. Itmar, Abaya Amar Mishmeid Rabbi Chia bar Rav. Abaya quoted Rabbi Chia, the son of Rav. These are great, families, of course, we know about. And he said, which is, of course, Rabbi Chia bar Rav is different than Rabbi Chia usually, who was a colleague or even teacher of Rav. But his son Rabbi Chia said, Chayav Shtayim, that in fact, if a man is sleeping with a woman and she becomes a nida, and then he goes out of her, then we said in the Mishnah, you're not allowed to do that, and you're chayiv for doing that. Says Abaya, you're chayiv twice, right? Now we're going to ask in a second, why you chayiv twice? Rava also said, Amar Shmuel bar Shva, Amar Rav Huna, chayiv shtayim. Why are you chayiv shtayim? Chada aknisa, one for entering her, and chada aprisha, and one for leaving her. Now, let's just come 1 second. When you went into this woman, she was not a nida, right? Just to be clear, when you penetrated her for intercourse, she hadn't yet told you she's a nida. It's only during the act she said, I'm a nida, and then you were paresh. You're not supposed to leave her until you lose your erection, and so you're chayav for the prisha. But how in the world are you chayav for the knisa? She wasn't a nida yet. So Havi bar Rabba, so Rabba wondered about this. He sat there and he had a dilemma. I don't understand the scenario in which you'd be chayav for entering her if she wasn't a nida yet. So now, Ilema b'samach levesta. Maybe I understand the case is, remember we're going to discuss this in Nida, extensively, that women have a period, right? So it's a veset. There's a time when you expect her period to come, which is why you call it a period, right? So it could be that she had a very fixed period, and you knew that this day, every month, 28 days, 30 days, 26 days, she has her cycle, her menstrual cycle. And so it's very close to that time. And remember, we discussed in Nida, you could even have the hours, right? She has her period at 10 hours of the day or midday every day. So she hasn't had it yet, just to be very clear, because if she had it already, of course you're chayav for sleeping with a Nida. She hasn't had her period yet, but it's very close to the time where she's likely to get her period. Now, Biman, who is the man who's sleeping with her? Ilema b'talmid chacham. If it's with a talmid chacham, so then maybe he should be chayav for sleeping with her, because he said to her, I know, remember, chayav here means you're chayav a karban because you did something by mistake, right? But remember, if it's an onus, you're not chayav a karban. So I could see why this is considered to be a shogeg, because he knew that her period was likely to happen. He didn't know for sure, and so he's not chayav on purpose, because bishlam knisa l'chayav, he's chayav for entering her, because savar, he thought, yichaloni leval, I'll be able to complete my intercourse. I'll finish the act before she has her period. I don't know exactly the minute she's going to get it. So he knew there was a risk. He thought, I will not be over the Avera. It turns out he was over the Avera because she becomes a Nida. And so he brings a Karban Chatat. I get it, right? He did an act that led to a sin unwittingly. But I don't get why he's chayav a Karban Chatat on the Prisha. Because once she says to him, I am a Nida, if he's a Talmid Chacham, he knows that you have to stop your action. And if he doesn't stop, then he's chayav not a chatat, he's chayav karet. Ela prisha, my chayav mezidu. He did it on purpose. So if you're talking about an educated person, then I don't understand how he could be chayav for a korban for the leaving her. Ibam Aretz turns to the top of Daf Yud Chet Amud Aleph. If he's not educated, he doesn't know what to do, then I don't get it. Why in the world, when he leaves her, he thought, okay, oh my God, she's a nida. The best thing for me to do is to leave. So he left, and turns out that was not the best thing to do, and so he's chayav a korban chatat. But then but then he did this. He did the same mistake twice, basically. It's as if he slept with her or did intercourse twice in one forgetting. Meaning he didn't know that what he was doing was wrong. It turns out it was, but he did two actions of intercourse in one wrong thing. So I don't understand why he'd be chayav two. He only should be chayav one. Ella, how do you explain it then? I feel like I'm going too far, but I'm going to keep going. Ella, you can repeat it tomorrow if he wants to. You must explain that the case is, second line, b'she'ein samuch levesta. It turns out it's not near her period, so it's a shock, right? The whole thing is unexpected. So then again, that doesn't make sense why you chayav two karbanot. Biman, who are you talking about? Then lo chada hu mechayav. He should be chayav even one karban because a knisa for sleeping with her onus, he had no reason to expect she would become a nida. So it's a complete onus. He's not chayav a korban for an onus. And then once he found out she was a nida and he left her, prisha, that's amazing, right? He should be chayav because he knew now she's a nida and he can't stop. Ibam Haaretz, if it's talking about a man who's not that educated, then chadu d'mechayav, you should just be chayav one korban a prisha. Because again, the entering her was a complete onus. Hajar Amar Rava, so then Rava explained, you know what I think? L'olam, it's talking about a case where it's a woman who is samach levesta. It's a woman who is close to her period. And he's a Talmid Chacham, and he should know that if I sleep with this woman, there's a chance she'll become a nida and I'll be over an isser. And so he knew going into her that it was an inappropriate thing to do. And if it turned out that she became a nida, he didn't do it on purpose, then he'd be chayav a korban. We said, so why is he chayav a second korban for the prisha? If he's Talmid Chacham, he should know not to separate from her. And if he does, he's over b'mezid. Because it's a case where he's Talmid Chacham Lazo, vein Talmid Chacham Lazo. He's educated for one fact and not for the other, which happens all the time. Right? He knows one halacha, which is that you can't sleep with a woman who's a nida samuch levesta, but he doesn't know the second halacha that if it does turn out she becomes a nida, you've got to stop your action, wait till you lose your erection, then leave her. He doesn't know that, and so he was a shogeg for both, and therefore he brings two karbanot, and that's how you explain the case of chayav two karbanot for a man who sleeps with a nida, and she discovers she's a nida she sleeps with a woman, discovers she's a nida in the middle, and then he's poresh. I'm going to stop here at Amar Rava and let him pick it up from there tomorrow.
Yasher Koach, thank you.
Thank you. Shavuot Tov. Charlie, have a great week.
Shavuot Tov. You too.